Shalom. Welcome to Just Medicine. I'm Michelle. Today we're going to be exploring part one of a three-part series on chronic illness. Chronic illness has had a substantial impact in my family and is hitting each generation harder and harder. For example, my maternal grandmother was diagnosed with stage 0 breast cancer, but she lived to be 90 years old. My mother was diagnosed at 77 and sadly, we lost her at age 79. As for me, I was diagnosed with stage 1, 2 at the age of 50. So each episode of these cancers are beginning earlier. They're hitting us harder and harder and just much more difficult to deal with. Interestingly enough, my mother and 2 of her siblings were diagnosed with cancer, all 3 of them within 6 months of each other. Both she and her sister and her brother were diagnosed with breast cancer and prostate cancer. So it got me wondering what's going on. Now you may ask, why is this important? Well, it's important because all 3 of us, or I should eat all 3 generations, had genetic testing done and none of us were positive. None of us were positive for a cancer gene, BRCA1 or 2 or prostate cancer. So a lot of folks would say, well, it's genetic. It's not genetic. Again, as I mentioned, none of us had those breast cancer or prostate cancer genes. So that got me thinking, that unusual trend, the triad of my mother and her siblings, and then each generation with breast cancer, what might be causing that if it's not a genetic link? So join me and let's find out.
Medical disclaimer. This content is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice, a diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of a qualified healthcare provider regarding a medical condition or any medical concerns. Is it just a statistic? It's not just statistical, it's personal. When we look at generational timelines like mine, it becomes instantly clear that we aren't just talking about abstract numbers on a screen. This isn't just statistical, it's deeply personal. It's our grandmothers, our mothers, our siblings, our aunts, uncles, children, even our own bodies. And once you see how personal this battle really is, you realize that millions of families are trapped in that same downward health spiral. Because of that, in this episode, we are going to address some of the most common types of chronic illnesses. In future episodes, we're going to do a deeper dive and look at those chronic illnesses and how they're diagnosed. We're going to look at what it's like to actually live with some of those chronic illnesses, and then more importantly, what can we do about them? Is my family's generational health a rare exception? The reality is, it's not. My family tree is not the rare exception at all. According to the CDC, 6 in 10 American adults are currently living with at least one chronic illness, and 4 in 10 have 2 or more. So when you look around at your own family, you're seeing what millions of other families are experiencing too. A chronic illness can be defined as a condition that lasts at least 1 year or more, requires ongoing medical attention, and often limits daily activity. Things such as working outside the home, shopping, driving, housekeeping, those kinds of things. Chronic illnesses rarely come from just one single source. While epigenetics is the primary driver, other major contributing factors include chronic stress, poor sleep, lack of activity, exposures to toxins. All of these things can create the perfect storm inside of your body. Are you completely locked into the DNA your parents gave you? You inherit the genes from your parents, but they stay primarily the same throughout your life. But your gene expression, which genes get turned on or off, that actually affects your health. And that control system, that's called epigenetics. What exactly is epigenetics? If your DNA is the hardware, epigenetics is the software telling your genes how to run. So think about your DNA like the hardware you're born with. Hand-me-downs for your parents, if you will. Epigenetics acts like the software that sits on top of the hardware. It controls which genes get turned on, which ones stay off, and how effectively those genes function. These epigenetic changes don't alter your actual DNA sequence at all, but they have a very powerful effect on your gene expression and ultimately on your health. What is actively rewriting your genetic software right now? There are 4 main things that have a tremendous impact on our health. Look at the foods that we eat. Highly processed, loaded with seed oils like canola oil, soybean, cottonseed oil. Those seed oils are heavily refined and very inflammatory. Another contributor, chemicals like BPA leached from plastic packaging. Most of our commercially available foods today are sold in plastic. Think about those water bottles that we drink from so often. Then environmental toxins, things like pesticides, air pollution, heavy metal, those all play a role. I remember a few years back there was a class action lawsuit against a pesticide company because their product was believed to contribute to cancer. And lastly, poor sleep, chronic stress, those two have a profound effect on how our genes behave, and most people have no clue how strongly that impact affects us. And what happens when these triggers, these factors stack up over time? Well, here's what makes them especially dangerous. These 4 factors don't usually just work alone. They compound one another. A poor diet causes inflammation, which then makes your body more vulnerable to chemicals, toxins, and the damaging effect of stress or poor sleep. So one problem makes the other ones hit much harder. And when they hit much harder, then that's when we're looking at some chronic illnesses. Which 3 major health crises are we breaking down today? Well, in this episode, we're going to discuss 3 major chronic illnesses that are deeply connected. Now, mind you, these are not the only ones out there, but these 3 are some of the most common chronic illnesses, and as I mentioned, they are deeply connected. So we'll look at metabolic dysfunction, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. And understanding how these 3 relate to each other is the key to seeing the bigger picture and potentially being able to mitigate some of the effects of them. So where does metabolic dysfunction begin? The first condition is metabolic dysfunction, which includes insulin resistance, things like PCOS, and type 2 diabetes. This usually starts in the gut, which generally speaking is the center of your overall health. Your gut, your digestive tract is typically the center of your overall health. So when we eat a poor diet, lots of processed foods, as I mentioned, those seed oils, junk foods, too many carbohydrates and sugars, this drives that inflammatory response throughout the body. That inflammation then sets the stage for other chronic conditions that we're going to talk about today. But virtually every other chronic illness is affected by metabolic dysfunction. As I mentioned, the gut is the primary health monitor for your body. How does that gut inflammation attack your heart? That same chronic inflammation from a metabolic dysfunction doesn't stop at the gut. It directly attacks the lining of your blood vessels. That inflammation causes damage over time to the vessels. It causes plaque to build up, and it causes your arteries to be less pliable and stiffen. So your blood pressure begins to rise. And this is exactly why people with diabetes or insulin resistance are at a much higher risk of heart attacks and strokes. So the connection between metabolic dysfunction and heart disease is much stronger than most people realize. What happens when a cellular warning system completely fails? Cancer. That's right, cancer. When this chronic inflammation and metabolic dysfunction continue for years and years, normal cells start behaving abnormally. And they begin to mutate or multiply out of control and grow in ways that they never should. So think about that like a pond. When you have a pond that has a fresh stream coming into it, it gets oxygenated and has a healthy ecosystem. But when that stream starts slowing down or stops, then you've got this pond water that is stagnant and things are growing in it that should not. So to tie things all together, the food that we eat, the chemicals and toxins we're exposed to, the chronic stress, lack of sleep, those are all things that are constantly influencing how our genes behave. This can kick off metabolic dysfunction, which creates widespread inflammation. That inflammation then fuels cardiovascular disease, or the inflammation can then ultimately lead to cancer. That's not to say that any one of these conditions will occur. It just means that unchecked, that inflammation can cause that expression of those genes. The good news is that we have so many of these factors that are within our control, and we're not completely powerless in the process. So join us when we look at episode 2 and episode 3, part 2 and part 3 of this particular episode, where we explore living with chronic illnesses and what we can do about them.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully you learned a little bit about chronic illness, maybe a smidgen about epigenetics, and some of the things that contribute to them. Go ahead and ring that notification bell so you get word on when we upload part 2. Part 2 is going to be great. We're going to be speaking with a lovely woman who was diagnosed at age 42 with congestive heart failure. She had her first heart attack at age 42. I can't even imagine, bless her. And so she is just absolutely lovely. The doctor gave her 6 months to live, and here she is 9 years later going strong and proving all of those physicians wrong. So like, share, and subscribe. If you have been living with a chronic illness, please drop that in a comment. Tell us what we can do to support you, if we can pray for you. And in the meantime, if this video has blessed you, well, we'd like to bless you back. May the Lord bring justice to your circumstance, peace to your mind, and healing to your body. Shalom.